Hi, this is Carl Franklin. You're watching DNR TV from DNRTV.com. I'm here with Jimmy Bogard. Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, Carl.
Jimmy's a software developer with Headspring Systems out of Austin, Texas. Co-author of ASP.NET MVC in Action, along with Jeffrey Palermo and Ben Sherman. He's a member of ASP Insiders and was awarded the MVP award for ASP.NET in 2009. So, Jimmy, you're the ASP.NET guy. What is automapper, which is what we're talking about today? What is it, and how does it apply to ASP.NET?
Well, automapper is a object-to-object mapper. So what that means is you take an object of one type and you map that to an object of a different type. And what we use it for in MVC is we use it to map our domain model into things that the V and the MVC, which is the views, can use. We also use it in several other places, mostly in places where we find that we have to transform our objects in some way to make it easier to work in other systems. So you can use it in things like mapping to services like web services or WCF, needing to push objects along the wire and data transfer objects and things of that nature.
So this is basically so you could create a set of entities or domain objects that represent items in the real world, and then instead of having to wire those things up directly to your view layer or your business layer or whatever you call it, you can just say, all right, I want this, when I say, my object.do something, I want that to actually call this particular method in the view or in our domain model and push these particular parameters to it.
Right, exactly. And the reason we got into this, we found that we originally started off just pushing our objects out to every single endpoint that might need them. And what we found is these other endpoints, one being, views and ASP.NET MVC, would exert some kind of push back on our model and make it to where so we had to modify it in subtle ways that we didn't really want to.
Right.
For example, in views and ASP.NET MVC, we found that things like input validation and model binding and things like that forces those models on the view side to look a certain way.
Right.
And we didn't want our domain model to be influenced by that. So what we wanted to do was create a whole separate object layer just for the views.
Now, when you say we, who are you talking about?
Well, I guess me.
Okay.
But it's a project that we've been doing for about a little over a year now.
Okay. So you developed automapper?
Yes.
So this is the sort of the ultimate in loose coupling, I guess you could call it.
Yeah. So what we wanted a separated object layer for our views, but the pain of doing that mapping was just too much to overcome. So I helped create automapper to make that translation much easier.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how that works. I guess I'm just going to ask you to go into a demo. One of the things that immediately comes to mind is, passing parameters to methods in objects that actually do something from your, from your view. How exactly does that work? And, I guess I just want to see an example.
Sure, yeah, let's get started.
Yeah.
The first thing we could do, if we just want to get it downloaded, we can go to the automapper homepage, which is at automapper.codeplex.com. We'll have links for all this as well.
Right.
And right now I'm at the RC1 release, which means I put it out there for people to use and try to give me as many bugs as possible before I actually call it, 1.0.
Yeah.
That's the one I'm going to be using today.
Okay.
This candidate one. And all it is just a single DLL. And in our MVC project.
Ooh, nice. I like your color scheme.
Yes, I stole it from Rob Connery, so.
I like it. You turned it all on its head. I love it.
Yeah. We just added reference in our UI project to automapper, and we can see it right here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a single library. So what I have going on in this, in our MVC project here, is I'm trying to show something of a blog site. So I have a domain layer that has a blog object. It has a post, which, a single blog has many posts.
Right.
A blog will have an author, and you may have comments and tags, and that's about all I did for that. And the relationship between these can be a little bit complex. You can draw all the arrows in many different ways.
Whoa.
And this is just a model with, not that many objects. So we see that a blog has many posts, a blog has an author, and a post has an author, which should be the same thing. A blog has many tags, and if you've gone to a lot of blog sites, you'll notice that a lot of them have these kind of tag cloud things where you can click on a tag and see all the posts by that tag. So those tags are aggregated up at the blog level. And then a post will have many comments. So this is kind of a complicated, even for something as simple as you think as blog sites, this can be a pretty complicated relationships between these entities.
Yeah.
One of the things we like to do in our views is try to simplify this and flatten it down to show only the pieces of information we care about.
Sure.
So we're going to start off with just creating a single page to show the list of blogs. You can imagine sites like, Geeks with Blogs.
Right.
That's a whole bunch of blogs on that site. So what we do is just provide a list of those. So if I go to my controller, the blog controller, right now I haven't filled anything out. There's one index action here, and what we're going to try to do is pass a list of blogs to the view. And what I've done already is just gone to our repository and queried for all the blogs that are in there, and that's what you see right here.
Okay.
Now right now, I don't have any backing store. It's just all in memory, just for demonstration. But typically, we have some kind of database backing store here. So what we want to do is create a representation of this list of blogs to show on our view. And we only want to show certain pieces of information there. So what I'm going to do is create a blog summary object. I believe I already have that here in my UI models. There we go, blog summary. And we're only going to put pieces of information here that we care about from our blog. So let's also bring up the blog object. See what we need to pull over. So we want to show the title of the blog. We're going to show the description of the blog. We have a description here. We're also going to try to show the author name. Now the author name, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm just going to call it author name.
A little bit different.
What we have in our domain model is a blog has a reference to an author. And if we look at the author has a name. What we're going to do on our view model object is just call it author name.
Well, because you're only interested in the name of the author.
Exactly. We're just going to show those three pieces of information for now on our blog page.
Okay.
All right, so what I'm going to do here is I need to create a mapping definition between the source type and the destination type. So I'm going to use the mapper class in the automapper namespace, and this is the class where pretty much every configuration and mapping operation goes through. I'm going to create a map between blog and blog summary. That line right there will configure a map between these two objects, and then to actually perform the map, I will call mapper.map.
Okay.
And map the blog array to a blog summary array.
Now the big question is, okay, now what does that give you?
This will will give us back an array of block summaries. Now what that does for us is a little bit more. So I'm going to pass in the block summaries to my view like this. So what this will do is create a set the view data's model to the block summary array object.
Okay.
And what I'm doing on my ASPX page here, my view, the first thing I'm doing is making sure that my page I'm using is using a strongly typed view. Now, in this example, I'm using the Fluent HTML model view page from MVC Contrib.
Okay.
But we could also just as easily use the strongly typed view page that comes out of ASP.NET and MVC as it is.
Okay.
The only reason I'm using the MVC Contrib one is it has some Fluent HTML that makes it easier to create HTML from strongly typed views using things like strongly typed reflection and things like that.
Okay.
The type of the model is a block summary array, and that's exactly what we passed in from the block controller. So what that gives us on this page is now the model property is a strongly typed block summary object. And we can see that here. We say model at index 0, and we'll get IntelliSense now. We get the author name, which is the flattened out view, description, and the title. So what I'm going to want to do is just loop through all these model objects and print out a list of the blogs on this site.
Okay.
So I'll print out the title of the blog, the description, and the author name. Title. Just to make it look nice, we'll put the title in some kind of heading.
Okay.
What I'm doing here is taking what I passed down to the view, which is a flattened out version of our view model, and just printing it out to the screen here. All right, so let's run this and see what happens here. All right, we'll go to our blog site, and we should see, there we go. You see Joe's blog, all sorts of tech goodness, and the author is Joe Schmo, and Bob's Boring Blile, where he just likes to rant. It's by our buddy Bob Sacamano.
Good.
So one of the first things we see is that nowhere in our model do we have something called author name.
Right.
On our blog. We have something called author.name. What automapper was able to do for us is able to look at the destination type member, author name, and notice that we've tried to flatten our domain model.
Right.
What we can do is if we have a very big model on our domain model side and we only want to see specific slices of it, we can flatten that out so it's a much more simplified view when we get down to actually developing our views.
And of course, the other great thing about being loosely coupled like this is that if your model ever has to change, you only have to change one map statement.
Right, exactly.
Not everywhere where you for example, author.name, if that became first name, last name, blah, 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 you'd have a lot of changing to do.
Right. One of the most frustrating things we did when we were doing manual mapping is just the actual left-hand side, right-hand side code. That's so dull and tedious that, typically we would just give it up. Okay, so suppose we have something else on here, on author. It's something like a method that returns their name with some fancy title at the end. So we call it get fancy name. And all we're going to do is return the name with something appended on the end.
Esquire.
Sounds good to me. Okay. What we can do in our blog summary object is not only have the author name, we can also have the author's fancy name. All right, so if we refresh our screen, we should see that.
Well, where did you do the mapping for fancy name?
Or I didn't have to.
It just automatically happens?
Exactly. Because the names match up, I don't have to configure anything. And
that's good.
That's really the selling point of automapper. So one of the things we had is on our domain model, we occasionally will have these methods that are these, some kind of little calculation or something that puts things together. And sometimes they're prefixed with the word get. So that's one of the things we added to automapper, just a convention that said, if something begins with a word get, just ignore it, and you don't have to have that on your destination type.
Cool.
Now if I go to my blog page, I should see that fancy name there.
Nice.
And my fancy name, Joe Schmo Esquire. I want to put something, the authors have a bio, so I'm going to also want to put that on there as well. So let's put that bio on there. The author has a bio property, and so we're going to put that in our blog summary object. It's going to be called author bio. And on the index page, we'll put it over here as well. And what we'll find is that one of our authors forgot to fill out his bio. So what I want to do is I'll go to my little data generator here that spit out all this blog information.
Okay.
And I'll just remove Joe's bio.
Okay.
There we go. We also found that when we were doing our mappings is that sometimes when we were going from our domain to the screen, we would want to format missing values in some way.
Okay.
All right. So now refresh. We'll see that Bob forgot to fill out his bio. So we could do something in our domain layer that says, well, if you don't have a bio, return some blank string or something like bio not set yet.
N/A, not available.
Right. And something like that, I wouldn't really say would be a domain problem. It's more of a presentation issue.
Yeah.
So that's a case where if we were just pushing our domain object straight out to the screen and binding directly to that, we'd either have to do some custom logic inside our view, or we'd have to do something to our domain model to take care of that missing value. And if we do it in our domain model, we'll have issues with, well, if that bio is persisted, is that blank text going to get persisted? Do we have to handle that?
Right.
We'd rather just not deal with that at all. So what I'm going to do is, in my automapper configuration, is configure a null substitute for that one piece of information. So after you have this create map call, you can start, if you have this anything extra you need to do, it just chains off the end. So I'll say for member, and I'll say my author bio. I want to give it an option for a null substitute. So what that'll do is that anytime we map from blog to blog summary, anytime it maps this author bio and it's missing or it's null,
yeah,
we'll have a not set yet value be the substitute.
Cool.
We'll see that on our screen here. So that's really helped us a lot when we have things like, I don't know, we're showing a date range and the end date is null. Instead of showing null, we'll show the text current. Things like that.
Right, right.
So Bob's bio now should show not set yet. And that came from the automapper configuration.
Nice. Good stuff.
Okay, so now we want to show each of these guys has individual posts they've done. So what I'm going to do is add something like add the number of posts that they've done on the screen. Now, in our blog class, we don't have really anything like that. We have a method that's just get posts, but we don't have anything that says get the number of posts or get the last date of the post or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
We may or may not want to add that to our domain object. We may just say this is something that's just calculated for this one screen and it is only for this presentation object. So what we'll do is, in the cases of these, kind of custom mappings that we have to do, we'll add a property in here for that piece of information. We'll have int number of posts. We'll go to our view and we'll add something on there to display that information. We're not going to run the issue that there's no method or property on our domain object that is called number of posts. So right now that piece of information just won't get mapped through automapper. So we have to tell automapper how to deal with that piece of information.
Right.
So for that, we'll use a construct called value resolvers. And those are pieces of mapping logic just for a single member on your destination type.
Okay.
And use the same for-member method. And this one will be the number of posts. Now we'll say I want to resolve using, and then I'll have to give it some kind of custom resolver. So I'll just wait on that for now, and down at the bottom I'll create this new custom resolver class.
And you'd pass it a delegate to that method or something?
Yeah, you can pass it a delegate. You can pass it an instance of a class, because sometimes we'll have things where a screen might show number of orders that customers place.
Mm-hmm.
That may not be, calculated immediately. It may have to go out to the database and perform a calculation and come back. So sometimes even these resolvers will go out and hit the database if we need to.
Okay.
Okay, so in my number of posts resolver, I can give it the source type that it's expecting, which in this case would be a blog. It's going to resolve to an integer. All I'm going to do is return the source getPosts.count. And back up in my mapping configuration here, I just tell automapper to use that number of posts resolver.
Cool.
All right, so let's see how we did here. We should see something on our screen come up that says number of posts, 1, 2, whatever we have here. And we just found resolvers helpful when there's that, we'll map the 95% case where everything just maps straight over from our source type.
Yeah.
There are these 5% cases where there is something missing there. So here we see number of posts, 2, and Bob's only put out 1 post. He needs to get with it.
So, Jimmy, is there anything that's just impossible to do with a mapper that you really need to be able to do?
Anything that's been impossible so far, we've just added.
Okay.
I'm using this for about a year now, and to begin with, all we had was just flattening.
Yeah.
And then we saw, well, there's that 5% case or 1%, whatever it is there, that, you have to get some custom calculation for that one piece of information.
Yeah. I guess that pretty much covers it.
Well, you think so, but then a year later, we're still finding extra cases. For example, we see here number of posts 1, but, maybe we don't want to have the plural version there for when they only have one post.
Oh, you might want to just show one post.
Yeah, we want to say number of posts or, something like that.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do there is there's another kind of special feature of automapper. Whenever you're mapping to something that is a string, we allow you to just chain as many, pretty much any kind of formatting you want on the end of that. So on the number of posts, what we're going to do is instead of mapping that to an integer on our summary object, we'll map it to a string and we'll make something format that appropriately.
Okay.
And then the information that gets passed to the view is now going to contain the entire text.
Oh, sure.
All right, so for that, we're going to need here we had a value resolver, now we're going to have a value formatter. Now, what we've used this for a lot is if we want to say site-wide, our dates look like this.
Right.
automapper lets us configure formatters for individual types. So if I want to say all date times have, just month, day, year, I could do it like that.
That's awesome. And it just changes in one place again.
Exactly. And what it's helped us do is just create kind of these conventions where customers don't like telling us every single screen how everything is supposed to be formatted. They want us to come up with, the conventions or, things like that. They don't want to keep thinking of all this stuff.
But then again, if something does come up and they say, yeah, we like that, but we want the entire month name spelled out.
Exactly.
You can just go to one spot.
Okay. So in this case, I need to return a string.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be receiving an integer value, so I'm going to say int value equals. Okay, so I have something that says if they only have one post, we'll just put out the text one post. Otherwise, we'll have something that says just a number. So in our mapping configuration, we now need to configure this number of posts to also use that formatter.
Right.
If we want to chain options, now we'll need to use a little block here. So we've said resolve using that resolver. We're also going to want to add a formatter, and the formatter is this number of posts formatter. Now, it's a lot more rare that I'm configuring formatters for individual members. It's more typical that I'm saying site-wide decimals look like this, site-wide dates look like that. Things like that. But there are occasions where individual members need to have individual formatting. All right, so on my view page now, I no longer need this number of post text, and I can just output that number of posts directly.
Right.
It now contains the entire text.
Beautiful.
A lot of the goals we had with automapper is trying to reduce a lot of the duplication we were seeing in our views, where something like the duplication ways we normally have of like HTML helpers and things like that. Oh, whoops. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm going from the source value.
Teachable moment.
There we go.
So you were saying?
There are occasions where there are just some little subtle duplication that we couldn't get rid of by programming things in our view that made it easier to do in this mapping layer that goes between the controller and the view. And this is one example of this kind of global formatting that we have.
Yeah.
So here you have now Bob has number of posts. He only has one post, and now it's formatted correctly. Now, what we've done right now with our configuration is put it just in our controller. But the way automapper is architected is that only needs to happen once per app domain. So what that means is it only needs to happen once per the life cycle of ASP.NET. An app domain of ASP.NET. Or if we're using things like WCF, it doesn't have to happen, it could be executed once per service factory call. Or if you're doing something like WPF or WinForms, it only needs to happen once per, every time you launch the application. But what we see here is this will actually get executed every single time we hit the controller. And we don't need to do that. So what I'm going to do is going to move that configuration out somewhere else and have it just set up automatically whenever our site gets loaded.
Nice.
What I want to do is, I already have some kind of bootstrapper object here. I already had some other bootstrapping things like route configuration and stuff like that. So I'm just going to put that in there. I'm going to pull over that information we just saw over here and put it in our bootstrapper. Okay. Now we don't have it under control anymore. We have it in this bootstrapper class. So that means our controller becomes easier to read, of course, because we don't have configuration in there. And there is a little bit of a cost, of course, when you're configuring these types, because automapper is using reflection to examine the source and destination types and try to match things up. So I don't really want to have that to happen every single request. But it can just happen once and never happen again.
Yep.
So when I come back, it should be exactly as it was. It's just the configuration moved out somewhere else.
Yeah.
All right.
Pretty slick. So let me ask you this. How many users do you have out there? And are they very good about giving you feedback and making suggestions and things?
Oh, yeah. I think we're almost hitting 1,000 downloads. I don't know if that's a lot or not. We've been close to 1,000 downloads, and I get about 20 or 30 or so messages a week on the automapper mailing list.
Uh-huh.
And so what I typically get is, I've been using this library for about a year now. And, I've been using it in the way I think I want to use it. But there's, of course, a lot of other people that are trying to use it in different ways that I haven't even thought of before.
Right.
So a lot of people are trying to do things like, we have a lot of people using Entity Framework out there, and they're going back and forth from the view model back to Entity Framework. That's what I've seen quite a bit.
Oh.
They're not pushing out they're again not pushing the entities right out, but their screen isn't that complex enough. They're just editing, one entity at a time, so they can take what they posted in a form and then map it right back into their domain object and save it.
Interesting.
So in our application, we don't do that. It's a little bit more complex, and you're not typically editing only one entity at a time. This is a records management application, so you might have a screen with 100 form elements, literally.
Yeah.
So that can map to all sorts of different things. So we, on the reverse side, just for us, we don't. It's too complex for us to try to do it in any kind of automatic way. But that's a lot of people out there are doing.
Huh. So I imagine you get a lot of great suggestions as far as features to implement. Oh yeah, and the community's been really good too about submitting patches as well. That's what I like the most. Less work for me. I could just integrate it directly. Give me an example of a feature that came about as the result of a suggestion. One thing we had was there was a case where a user was editing child objects of a parent object. So you can imagine something like if I was editing, for example, a post on a blog, and there was a list of them. What they found was that on their blog, they would have a list of posts, but on each post, they wouldn't necessarily have a reference back up to the parent blog object. And so they needed that to be filled in somehow. But that information wasn't anywhere to be found on post because there is no reference back up. So you imagine something like, you post the form back and you need the parent ID of the blog so you can edit the blog and edit that post, but that information wasn't there. So one thing we added was the ability to add these custom callbacks for before and after you do a mapping operation. Oh, sure. So that's just like you can just do whatever you want. You'll say, here's the before map or after map. You'll get the source and destination object and a callback, and you can just do whatever you want with that. Yes, you could do a query if you needed to, or a link query, or a lambda, or...
Yeah, this is where it does like really, really edge cases where something like a resolver or something like that just isn't there for you. So yeah, those are those custom, just have to post-process the message after you're done.
Nice.
Another thing we added was, sometimes you have types you're mapping between where there is no automatic mapping between the two. For example, we'll have something like we want to map between a primary key type and the actual entity behind it. So you can do something like when you're mapping from a DTO back into a strongly typed domain message or command object, that an integer gets translated to a actual entity on the other side. So the way we set that up, those are called type converters. And you'll do something like create map, and I might go between int and blog. Now, of course, there is no automatic mapping between those two. So what I do is I would give it a type converter by saying convert using, and I can give it either a callback function or I can give it an actual object or a type that will perform the actual, let's go out to the database, grab the right blog, and pull it back out. We've also done things like that where if you want to have global string to date converters, string to int converters, things like that where you're going from a more loosely typed model that we typically use on the view model to a more strongly typed one. We want to get back and stop having all these, parse int, parse this, parse the other thing. So that's what's helped us out here, these type converters. So as we started out was just a simple, take one object and flatten to another. On our team, we've really stretched that and tried to use it in all these different kind of mapping scenarios where we're taking an object that is built for one layer and transform it into an object that's built for another layer. So right here I've shown how we've taken our domain model and transformed it into something for a view model for MVC. But we've also done things like we're using reporting tools, and those things expect a very different look and feel of what they're trying to map to, so we'll map to something that are appropriate for that. We're doing things like we're integrating with vendors that need EDI exports, and of course those have all sorts of fixed width things like that. So what we do is we map that into an EDI model that is a lot easier to deal with and spit out just raw text. And again, we've also had these really complex screens where we're taking a form post object and decomposing it into a list of commands that then get executed behind the scenes. So we'll have something like, someone that wants to create a new post and also add a comment. We might have just one thing that handles the comment and one thing that handles the blog post, and we'll turn that into two separate command objects that didn't start off. So just kind of all these, once we've started seeing the ability for us to, create these different layers and map between them using automapper, we've been able to really take advantage of creating these separated models out where, just because we're doing EDI doesn't mean we have to add all these methods on our domain model to handle EDI.
Yeah, again, this just seems like the ultimate sort of loose coupling device.
And that's where, as long as things kind of match up and you follow the convention, things work well. Now, the places where it doesn't work, sometimes we're doing things where we're mapping to an external service, WCF service, where the client dictates what the message looks like. In those cases, the destination type doesn't look anything like the source type. And so those were, we're almost better off just hand rolling a mapping and just saying, well, this just isn't the right, there's no thing that automatically maps, so there's no point in using the automapper.
Right.
But for internal pieces, this decoupling has really helped us out. Now, earlier you brought up this case where what if something changes on the domain model? What if the game becomes something different? So, because you see here there was no configuration for that one member between author name on the blog summary and the author.name on blog, things can get off. So if I rename the author's name to something like full name, for example, so my resharper or my favorite refactoring tool will rename it everywhere I'm using author, but because I have that decoupling, there's nothing leaking it to this name.
Right.
So no, that link is now broken.
Yep.
So the other thing we wanted to do is whenever we were hand rolling these mappings, in addition to actually the annoyance of writing the mapping code, was also writing the code to test our mappings. That was also really frustrating and tedious. So that's something also we started out from the get-go on automapper was saying we want to have an easy way to test our configuration. Just to make sure you have these cases like this where the names don't match up, that you get notified of that. So what we've tried to do is make it as absolutely simple as possible. And we'll create a test mappings. Or you might test attribute here. Remember I had this little bootstrapper, so what I'm going to do is first call my bootstrapper and execute my mapping configuration. Now this does a whole bunch of other stuff. So what I think I'll do is move this automapper configuration into a separate bootstrapper, just so I don't want, my data generator causing my test to fail. Or actually what I'll do is extract a method for that I can call directly. Configure automapper. Okay, so I've extracted the method out. I'll make it public. And now we'll go see what happens if I try to configure and test my mappings. So the first thing I do in my test is call my bootstrapper and configure that one little piece. I wonder if I didn't add that reference to the project. Oh, there it is. There we go. Configure automapper. And to test my configuration, well, I need to add a reference to automapper, of course. To test my configuration is just one single line. And what that one single line will do things like, make sure my names match up. Automapper assumes that everything that you've created on your destination type assumes that you're wanting to map that member. So if I add a property on my block summary object that doesn't exist anywhere else, this will not pass this test. Let me get that reference back up to automapper here.
Sure.
Oh. There we go. All right, so let's run this test and see what happens here. Now what should happen is we should see a failure here that because we changed my author's name to full name and I didn't change my block summary object, we should see something here. And here we have, it says the following one property on block summary are not mapped, author name. So that's telling me that anytime I change something on my domain model, this gives me feedback that, hey, this no longer matches up on your destination object.
Wow, that's easy.
We also do things like, if you have an array of blog summaries, you'd also check to see, well, if you haven't configured that mapping, it'll also throw that exception and say, hey, if you're trying to map between these two types, I don't know how to do that. So let's go here and rename this to author, what do we call it, author full name?
It was just author, I think. Oh, no, just author name.
Oh, it used to be author name. Now it's going to be author full name.
Oh, that's right. You changed it from author to author full name.
Just
or full name.
Yeah, from name to full name here.
Yep.
Okay, so now our test should pass again. Run that test again. Yep, and now we pass. So we get that comfort that we know that, if we happen to change something in our domain model, we don't have to go find all the different places that we might have mapped that object. Instead, we just rely on this two-line test to say, by the way, that something you renamed over there or changed or removed, that's no longer made this other piece valid.
Yeah.
Well, if I've done things like removed that property from that object, it'll tell me, and then I can remove it from my view object here. So that would also mean that if I don't change my view and no longer have the author full name or whatever I've deleted, then my view won't compile anymore. So that gives us that traceability all the way from our source types all the way to the views where we're using it.
Well, this is fantastic stuff. I can imagine your download count's gonna at least double after this.
Yeah, I hope so. I like to get a lot of feedback, get people using and tell me where I need to improve it. So that'd be great.
Where can we get it?
Oh, you can get it from the automapper site, which is at automapper.coplex.com.
Great,
and there's a download link right in the homepage.
And it's a free tool right now?
Oh, it'll always be free. Our company is very open source friendly. We're actually there's a big Mono conference coming up here in October that we're sponsoring. Headspring is that's one thing that I like about working here is we're pretty big on open source, so this will always be free.
Awesome. Speaking of Mono, have you seen Mono Touch yet?
No, I have not. It's on my long list of things I need to look at, along with a lot of other things.
They're doing some really good stuff.
It looks really cool. It's very interesting to be able to use C# to program on the iPhone. That sounds pretty cool.
That sounds very, very cool. All right, man. Jimmy, thank you very much. This has been a great talk. Is there any last minute thing that you want to just throw out there before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. If you have any more questions or anything, feel free to check out the mailing list. The link is on the Coplex site. And I'm trying as hard as I can to fill in all the documentation. So check out there if you have any questions first, and otherwise hit the mailing list. And thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Jimmy. Automapper is a great tool, and check it out right now. I'm sure you will. And we'll see you next time on DNR TV.